and by an individual. And so for this chapter, we're violent offenders, we're discussing, like why people commit such violent crimes. And we're going to be looking at it from an ecological and biological perspective today. And what ecological means is pretty much relating to the study of animal behavior in their natural environment. So we'll be looking at ourselves as humans from an animalistic perspective. So aside from biological and ecological theories, what other reasons, factors may cause individuals to commit such violent crime? Here's a list of all kinds of factors such as national identity, ideology, religion, personality, assimilation, then physiological, biological, and psychological and sociological change. So when looking at animals specifically, there are multiple reasons for why they may become aggressive with each other. And these three examples of aggressive animals, but it doesn't mean that animals don't become aggressive either. These are just the primary examples. The young men compete for status by being strongest and toughest, so they feed on each other. The best and the strongest. Territorial aggression, animals fight to control landmarks or define as their own. So an example of that is drinking, and India's like Pakistan conflict, as well as other countries like fighting for land. Status and dominance, male chefs fight for status and much of daily routine revolves around this. Once he reaches high status, he becomes less violent. So once he already, beats up and is aggressive to all the lower status humans, he chills out and is no longer violent because he's already. So once again, the ecological argument is based from an animalistic perspective. Our animal ancestors were completely violent beings, and since we have evolved from them, we too must invariably have the destructive impulses in our genetic makeup. So we're just like animals, like hay or TV. We have instincts in us that however, not every person engages in violence, but we're all people of violence. So why do certain people commit violence but not everyone? Here are some other factors to consider alongside the ecological perspective, such as temperament, gender, emotion, biological predisposition, and or trauma, presence or absence of weapons, alcohol, drugs, and cultural, political, institutional context. So moving on from the examples so far, so moving on from the more animalistic theories to the biological explanations. And biological explanations are pretty controversial, and I hope we take the time to learn about them today. We don't really use them so much anymore. And biological theories are based on bad science, and they suggest that crime is caused by individuals with defects. So individuals like certain ear shapes, head shapes. So essentially you can look at somebody and they have a different characteristic than to the majority of humans. It's oh, that person is probably more prone to commit crime than others. Simply looking at someone. Frank Joseph Gall suggested that criminals and violent offenders can be identified by shape of the skull. And Cesar Lombroso, who's kind of the father of modern criminology, he did major studies back in the 18th, 19th century. He suggested violent criminals are evolutionary throwbacks to their atavisms. So similar to Francis Joseph Gall, he suggested that individuals with certain physical characteristics are more prone to commit crime. More specifically, if someone has a small head, large facial area, a sloping forehead, large protruding ears, or abnormally large teeth, you can look at systems don't really use these theories anymore because they have been used to describe pretty horrible actions against fellow humans, such as racism, discrimination, oppression, slavery, genocide. So previously, people in positions of power and leadership, they tried to make policies where it's like, oh, these people are genetic throwbacks, so let's, take them out of the gene pool because obviously they're no use to society besides committing violent crimes. Obviously, that's a problem, and that's why we don't really use the biological genes anymore. I think it may have been in the 1960s or earlier when there was a eugenics movement. So not only are you a genetic throwback, but we don't want you producing any more genetic throwbacks, so they justify sterilization, discrimination against individuals. And like I said, many social scientists distrust the biological studies of criminology because of how we justify primates. We're gonna back out of this right quick, and we're gonna
in this video, I'll talk about Cesare Lombroso. Cesare Lombroso was born in 1835 in Verona, in Italy. He was an Italian doctor who did research and wrote on a variety of topics, for example, mental diseases, scientific ways to study corpses, and brain pathology. But his most important work, and certainly the work that he's best known for today, is the book The Criminal Man. In The Criminal Man, first published in 1876, Lombroso developed his theory of criminal anthropology to explain why people commit crime. His theory suggests that there are basic differences between offenders and non-offenders. More specifically, according to Lombroso, born criminals have certain physical characteristics or abnormalities that make them different. Lombroso called these abnormalities atavistic characteristics. Atavistic comes from the word avatus, which means ancestors in Latin. According to Lombroso, the physical abnormalities that offenders have occurred because offenders were the products of an earlier stage of human evolution, a stage where more primitive humans and apes existed. Thus, offenders are basically throwbacks to earlier phases of human history. Connected to the idea of atavistic characteristics is the idea of degeneration. According to Lombroso, offenders have certain physical and mental characteristics of primitive humans, and they commit crime because of these biological abnormalities. Lombroso's ideas were based on his own research. One of the things that he is known for is that he conducted very detailed studies of people, and particularly studies of people's bodies. Different from many others who had gone before him, Lombroso started to directly study offenders and measure and document the characteristics of their bodies. Over the course of his life, he and his students studied thousands of people. They studied different types of people, namely offenders, non-offenders, and also mentally ill people. And they not only studied people who were alive, but they also did autopsies on deceased people. For example, to study their skulls and their brains. Examples of things that Lombroso measured were people's height, weight, the span of their arms, the average height of their body while seated, the sizes of their hands, necks, thighs, legs, and feet, and their eye color, and so on. So let's have a look at what he found in his research. According to Lombroso, the offender was a special type of human being. The offender was not so much a non-normal human, but really a different type of human. This different type of human had a variety of physical characteristics that made him or her different from regular people. A couple of examples of these physical characteristics were an asymmetric face, a large jaw, excessively long arms, and epilepsy. People who had these characteristics were atavistic and thus were criminal in nature. Lombroso even thought that one could recognize different types of offenders, with thieves having different physical characteristics from violent offenders. In the first edition of his book, Lombroso very much leaned on these physical characteristics and measurements to distinguish born offenders from non-offenders. And he used his atavistic theory to explain why some people were born offenders. But as he kept updating his book and published new versions of it, he added things to it. For example, he also took other factors that may be linked to criminal behavior into consideration. For example, poverty, alcohol, and gangs. There were also more psychological characteristics that Lombroso associated with being an offender, such as lack of feelings of remorse or being cynical or impulsive. But these factors are not often connected to Lombroso because he devoted a lot of his work to biology and physical abnormalities. Cesare Lombroso is sometimes called the father of modern criminology, and he's often seen as the founder of the positivist school. The positivist school used measurements as a way to find evidence for the causes of criminal behavior. In Lombroso's case, that was done with his measurements of people's physical characteristics. He was a well-known scholar in his time, and many people, both from Italy and from abroad, visited him to discuss ideas with him. Lombroso was certainly not the only one who thought that physical characteristics were linked to criminal behavior. He had a lot of influence on other Italian criminologists too, and together these scholars are often called the Italian school of criminology. Lombroso did not agree at all with the idea of free will, so with the idea that people make decisions freely. The philosophy of free will was important in Italy at the time. But instead, Lombroso was much more interested in factors outside of a person's free will that influence behavior, and he was not the only one. This was a time in world history where Darwin's evolutionary theory was gaining popularity, and sociology was coming up, where it was thought that every society and every individual was affected by outside forces such as war and famine, and that wealth and class affected the way in which we live our lives. This, of course, challenged the idea that humans have free will. In other words, Lombroso wasn't an outlier. He fit right in with his time. In fact, he had significant influence on these ideas. But as you might expect, his ideas have also received a lot of criticism, both during his own life and after his death in 1909. Some of the most important criticisms were that he did not interpret his findings correctly and that he did not examine them critically. It is now widely agreed upon that his findings were not accurate and do not support his theory of atavism and degeneration. As a result, Lombroso's ideas about atavism have been abandoned, and Lombroso himself is probably one of the more controversial figures in the history of criminology. But other ideas that find their roots in his work, such as the idea that there may be physical characteristics that can contribute to criminal behavior, are very much alive in criminology today. For example, the idea that genes and brain structure are related to criminal behavior has seen an increasing amount of interest in the past few decades. All in all, Lombroso's ideas about crime, atavism, and degeneration are now widely believed to be biased and flawed. But recent research in criminology has certainly seen an upswing when it comes to studying the biological causes of criminal behavior. For more fascinating criminology and criminal justice stuff, subscribe to this channel and turn on the alarm bell, or
Any questions or comments concerning the video? So now we're gonna move a little more towards, instead of like outwardly physical characteristics, we're gonna look more like internal characteristics. So maybe it's not the way somebody looks, but maybe it's the lack of serotonin that limits their ability to control themselves, therefore causing them to be impulsive, aggressive, or on the way. Or on the other hand, perhaps an individual has too much testosterone and that limits their ability to control themselves. And this slide is not trying to imply that everyone with low serotonin or everyone with high testosterone is like gonna commit crime. The slide is just implying that these may be a couple factors as to why someone can commit crime. Also, brain injuries and antisocial personality disorder we're just focused on brain function by looking at things such as fusions on the brain caused by injuries, tumors, and other kinds of head trauma. Because, once you receive a brain injury, like your entire functioning, your cognitive abilities, all of that can get jacked up. So if you receive a brain injury, you may become more impulsive, lose the ability to control also a table, regarding this, disorder and Yelp. But it's actually like page 44 or 43. Here's some, personality traits regarding individuals with personality disorder, superficial charm, self-worth, pathological lying, cunning, manipulative behavior, lack of remorse. Here are some lifestyle traits of many individuals with antisocial personality disorder: constant need for stimulation, bored easily, parasitic lifestyle, poor impulse control, early onset behavioral problems, lack of realistic long-term goals, responsibility, and some of them may pertain to juvenile delinquency. And here's some other traits, such as promiscuous behavior, multiple short-term marital relationships, criminal versatility and skills. So aside from individuals with antisocial personality disorder, other factors may influence someone's chronological thinking or actions, such as high psychopathy. Also back in, I think, the 1980s, 90s, there was this myth going around that there were super predators amongst the community, and a super predator is pretty much young, violent men, offenders just going around rampaging, committing crimes. We know now that that's a myth. There's also sadism. People get gratification from violence. Violence is fun, exciting, empowering, but they blood and crimes. There's also the frustration, aggression hypothesis, and the stress and violence hypothesis. Violence is the one possible response for individuals who feel frustrated and thwarted in achieving something. So I'm assuming y'all took chronological theory, right? Well, you can think, if you are familiar with chronological theories, you can kind of think about the general strain theory. So when an individual is not able to achieve legitimate success, then they're going to be frustrated and angry and I rush out and commit crimes. So the frustration, aggression, and stress and violence hypothesis is similar to the general strain theory. So regarding stress and violence, many minority populations live in more impoverished and more difficult life situations, and these situations are largely responsible for the higher levels of violent crime. So once again, it's kind of similar to the general strain theory. Economic deprivation, there's racism, discrimination, and this is where I stop. But I do have another video that Dr. Rock wanted to show. Before I play the video, any questions or comments?
Your car door while submerged underwater.
They wanted to die, Edmund Kemper uttered, his voice devoid of emotion, almost bored. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their implication. He sat across from seasoned detectives, a mountain of a man with a disarmingly boyish face. His confession, however, painted a horrifying picture. Kemper, a seemingly gentle giant, was a monster in disguise. He had brutally murdered and dismembered 6 young women, his own mother and her best friend. His chilling confession, delivered with a disturbing calmness, sent shivers down the spines of even the most hardened investigators. He described the gruesome details of his crimes with an unsettling detachment. He spoke of decapitation, necrophilia, and cannibalism as if discussing the weather. His words were a punch to the gut, forcing the detectives to confront the darkest recesses of the human psyche. The man before them was not a raving lunatic, but a calculating predator who had meticulously planned and executed his crimes. Kemper's confession was a terrifying glimpse into the mind of a serial killer. It shattered the illusion of normalcy, revealing the monster lurking beneath the surface. His words were a chilling reminder that evil can wear many faces, even that of a seemingly gentle giant. The detectives listened, horrified yet strangely captivated, as Edmund Kemper, the co-ed killer, detailed his descent into madness. Even in childhood, a darkness clung to Edmund Kemper. Born into a tumultuous household in Burbank, California, his life was marred by his parents' volatile relationship. His father, Edmund Emil Kemper II, was a World War II veteran who struggled to adjust to civilian life. He belittled Edmund Jr., calling him weird and dismissing his intelligence. His mother, Clarnell Stage, was an emotionally abusive alcoholic who often blamed Edmund for her problems. Trapped in this toxic environment, young Edmund's behavior became increasingly disturbing. He exhibited cruelty towards animals, a chilling precursor to his future crimes. He decapitated his sister's dolls, burying them in the garden in a mock graveyard. He once even turned a kitchen knife on his older sister, stopping just short of harming her. These early signs of violence, though deeply troubling, were dismissed as childish fantasies. At the age of 10, Kemper was sent to live with his paternal grandparents on their isolated ranch in North Fork, California. He loathed the move, viewing it as further rejection from his parents. His grandmother, an overbearing woman, constantly criticized and berated him, fueling his resentment. It was on this isolated ranch, far from the watchful eyes of society, that Edmund Kemper's dark fantasies began to take root and grow. The simmering rage within Edmund Kemper finally boiled over on August 27, 1964. This day would mark the beginning of a series of events that would forever change his life and the lives of those around him. He was just 15 years old, a mere teenager, grappling with emotions he couldn't control. After a heated argument with his grandmother, Maud Kemper, he retrieved a .22 caliber rifle that his grandfather had gifted him for hunting. The rifle, once a symbol of bonding and trust, now became an instrument of death. He shot her multiple times in the head and back as she sat at the kitchen table, her last moments filled with confusion and fear. The kitchen, once a place of family gatherings, was now a crime scene. The sound of gunfire echoed through the house, marking the start of his descent into utter darkness. The once peaceful home was now filled with an eerie silence, broken only by the echoes of the fatal shots. Panicked, yet strangely exhilarated, he waited for his grandfather, Edmund Emil Kemper Sr., to return from a grocery run. His mind raced with thoughts of what he had done and what he was about to do next. As the unsuspecting man stepped out of his car, Edmund Jr. shot him dead in the driveway. The rural setting, usually serene and quiet, was now tainted with violence and bloodshed. The murders, committed with a chilling calmness, were only the beginning of his gruesome spree. His face, devoid of emotion, reflected the coldness of his actions. He later claimed that he killed his grandmother to see what it felt like, and his grandfather to spare him the grief of finding his wife dead. These justifications, however, did little to mask the horror of his actions. In the aftermath of the murders, Kemper called his mother, confessing to his heinous crimes. His voice, filled with a mix of fear and relief, revealed the complexity of his emotions.
Hi everyone, Mark Barton here at City.
Clarnell, terrified of what her son had become, urged him to call the police. Her hands trembled as she held the phone, the reality of the situation sinking in. He was subsequently diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and committed to the Atascadero State Hospital, a maximum security facility for mentally ill convicts. The hospital, with its barred windows and strict security, became his new home. Despite the gravity of his crimes, he was deemed rehabilitated and released at the age of 21. The world outside the hospital gates awaited him, unaware of the darkness that still lingered within. It was a decision that would have horrific consequences. The marked dates on the calendar foreshadowed the terror that was yet to come. Section 4, Freedom and its Price, a troubled release. Upon his release in 1969, Edmund Kemper was a free man. despite the protests of many at Atascadero who recognized the danger he posed. The staff at the hospital had seen the darkness within him and feared what he might do if given the chance. He was placed on probation and returned to live with his mother in Aptos, California. This arrangement was far from ideal, as it placed him back into the toxic environment he had once escaped. The reunion, however, was far from harmonious. The tension between them was palpable, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. Clarmel, still trapped in her cycle of alcoholism and resentment, constantly belittled and demeaned her son. Her harsh words and cruel behavior only served to deepen the wounds that had never truly healed. She refused to allow him to date, seeing women as a threat to her control over him. Her possessiveness and manipulation were suffocating, leaving him feeling trapped and powerless. Despite his imposing size, he stood at 6'9" and weighed over 250 pounds. Kemper craved acceptance and affection. His physical presence was intimidating, but inside he felt like a lost child yearning for love. He enrolled at Cabrillo College, hoping to start a new life. He sought a sense of normalcy and a fresh start, away from his mother's oppressive influence. He was intelligent and articulate, even becoming a student police aide. His ability to blend in and appear normal was a testament to his cunning nature. He befriended several officers who were oblivious to the darkness lurking beneath his affable exterior. His charm and wit made him a likable figure, masking the sinister thoughts that plagued his mind. Yet, beneath the surface of normalcy, Kemper's dark fantasies festered, fueled by his mother's constant rejection and his own twisted desires. The facade of a well-adjusted young man was just that, a facade. He began to prowl the highways of California, picking up female hitchhikers. These unsuspecting women had no idea of the danger they were in when they accepted a ride from him. His size and seemingly gentle demeanor disarmed his victims, lulling them into a false sense of security. They saw him as a gentle giant, not the monster he truly was. He would drive them to secluded areas where he would overpower and murder them, fulfilling his darkest fantasies. The isolation of these locations ensured that no one would hear their screams. His killing spree, once dormant, had been reawakened, more brutal and depraved than before. The horrors he inflicted were a manifestation of the rage and pain that had been festering within him for years. Section 5, the co-ed killer. A reign of terror begins. The Santa Cruz area was gripped by fear in the early 1970s. The once peaceful streets now echoed with an undercurrent of dread. Young women were disappearing at an alarming rate, their bodies later found brutally murdered and dismembered. The community was paralyzed with fear, unsure of who would be next. The press, hungry for a story, dubbed the unknown assailant the co-ed killer, a moniker that instilled terror in the hearts of parents and college students alike. Headlines screamed of the latest atrocities, feeding the growing panic. Unbeknownst to them, the monster they feared was hiding in plain sight. He moved among them, unnoticed, blending seamlessly into the fabric of everyday life. Kemper's first victims were Marianne Pesey and Anita Luchessa, two Fresno State University students. They were young, full of life, and had their futures ahead of them. He picked them up while they were hitchhiking, drove them to a secluded area, and shot them both in the head. The isolation of the area ensured no one would hear their cries. He then took their bodies back to his apartment, where he engaged in necrophilia and dismembered them before disposing of their remains in the Santa Cruz Mountains. The brutality of his actions was beyond comprehension. The killings, marked by their brutality and depravity, sent shockwaves through the community. Vigils were held, and the community mourned the loss of their daughters. As the body count rose, so too did the pressure on law enforcement. Detectives worked around the clock, their offices cluttered with case files and evidence. The co-ed killer became a morbid obsession, his crimes splashed across newspapers and discussed in hushed tones. The fear was palpable, and the community was on edge. Little did anyone suspect that the affable giant who frequented the local bar, engaging in friendly banter with police officers, was the monster they were hunting. His charm and demeanor masked the darkness within. Kemper, emboldened by his ability to evade capture, continued his reign of terror, his crimes escalating in their brutality. Each new crime scene was more gruesome than the last, leaving the community in a state of